Well, hey, Liz, this is a real treat. As I mentioned, I followed you for some time and really enjoyed the contributions that you make to the selling ecosystem that we're so blessed to be a part of. Something that you touched on that I found very intriguing is talking about sales language, out with the old, in with the new. And having been in sales for a considerable amount of time, I'm intrigued by what you think about this, because while process and fundamentals and people are so critical to sales and always will be, the language and the words that we choose to use are so important, but they change a lot. So would love to hear your thoughts in that realm.
Well, for years we were told that your words were only 7% of any kind of communication. And I call BS on that now. And I say it's 100% of communication. Of course, your body language and your tone, all of that matter. But so much of our communication now is done online. We're sending emails. We're doing prospecting via social selling. So no one can really see our body language for that. And that's why I say 100% of what you type in an email, what you say, even in a voicemail, however you're communicating with someone, even through LinkedIn or in Facebook, your words matter. And the words you use and choose can have a great impact on the results that you get, or they could make you look like everyone else on the planet because everyone else is saying the same thing. So if you don't change your language, it's going to be really hard to change your results. So I'm a big believer that language is what starts moving the conversation forward.
You hit on a couple of things that are really near and dear to my heart. So first off, there's some things in sales and frankly in career and even in life that we can control. And I think it's critical that we exert control over those elements. And one of those is the language that we choose to use. I'm a big believer in a focus on the quality of our messaging, which can change and evolve. We have to be very open to that changing and evolving over time. What's a pertinent message today for a customer may not be the same way 6 months down the road. And it's not the same thing that's tried and true from last year or specifically 2 years ago. Right. The other element is the quantity. So you find a quality message and you want to make sure that you're evangelizing that to as many of the key influencers and also influencers of influencers as possible. It's very rare where I can go out and just create a BDM relationship that I want right off the cuff. It's, you've got to make sure you're looking at how do I kind of swarm this executive by reaching out to some of their other influencers, developing some mind share and then getting momentum. And then lastly, the consistency component. But when it comes to the quality of message, probability is so important. You said something around you don't want to sound like everyone else. I am such a believer in having a unique narrative and voice. And I would love for you to spend a little bit more time on that. How can we as sellers, as leaders, as thought leaders, develop a unique voice? How do you find that?
It's a really big question, but the very first place I would start is take out the fluff. Take out all of those filler words that do absolutely nothing to make you stand out, to make you sound any different, to get someone's attention. And I always say, if you can't get someone's attention, you'll never, ever, ever get their business. Never. And I don't care how many emails you send, if they all sound the same, if everyone is sending the same email to someone's inbox, how does that person who's receiving it differentiate it? So leaving out the fluff and I call them phrase grenades and language landmines and word bombs, because once you launch these into an email, you do sound like everyone else and they cause your communication to blow up in your face. For example, starting out with, hope you're doing well. I hope this email finds you well. Hope you had a great weekend. Really? Do you really? Do I believe that there's sincerity in that? You sat down and typed that out and really thought of me and hoped that I had a good weekend? It doesn't land on the person that you're sending it to. It bounces right off of them. It adds no value to the communication. So I say, leave that out. If you really want to be nice and you really feel like you have to add some fluff, put the fluff at the end where they're probably not going to read it anyway. You could say, P.S., hope you had a great weekend at the bottom. Don't start your message the same way a lot of spam messages start out. Many of the spam messages we get all have, hope you're doing well, hope you're doing great, hope this email finds you well. It doesn't help us anymore. It actually can hurt. So that's said. One way.
Yeah, so well said, Liz. I think one key element, and look, we're all guilty of these at some point in our career. And I think it's key that even if you are, acknowledge that element and start to look at how can I make the structure of an email or a phone call or my message overall, how can I make it more effective? How do I make it land? How do I make it resonate? And the way to do that is to provide the fact that you've got a unique voice, add value right out of the gate. And a lot of times too, it comes from a very much of a place of servitude. Like, how can I reach out in a way that is going to create and offer something unique, but also just not fit into the same mold, that templatized approach that so many of us take.
Yes.
I like to liken it to a job search. You better believe that every job that you apply for, no matter how good you feel you are of a fit, there's probably 100, if not 1,000 other people that have applied for the same role. So what's going to make you stand out? What's your personal brand? What does that say about you uniquely as an individual? Apply the same thing to whenever you're reaching out to some of these executives. I've talked to a lot of C-suite, people within organizations, and I ask them sometimes, like, how often do you hear from sellers? Like, what works, what doesn't? And I find it fascinating because, I mean, they get hundreds of emails, over the course of even a month, just from different sellers trying to get a hold of them. And it's full of fluff, to your point. And I ask them, like, how do you differentiate? How does something stand out? How does something get a meeting with them? And it's every time. It's exactly what you highlighted. It's low fluff, high action. What's the value? What's the unique vantage point or perspective that I'm going to bring? Or what's a resource that I'm reaching out with? So I love that you highlighted on that.
I call that the verbal 2x4. You want to hit them with the verbal 2x4. And if you're not getting their attention, you just become another. You fall down in their inbox and you just go lower and lower and lower. And then what people do is send another email that says, I just wanted to get it in the top of your email. Well, where's the value in that? You're being self-serving by saying, hey, I'm trying again. I'm not adding any value, but I'm bloating your inbox with what I want to do, not what you truly need from me or the value that I think I can provide. And we're missing that. There's all these little missing components of the way they're connecting and communicating with people. And once they're all shored up, you have a great, powerful message and a structure to writing that message, then you start writing messages to someone, not at someone. And it's felt. I can tell a message that was written to me, not directly at me. And there's a difference. You could feel it, and there's sincerity in there. And that's what people are looking for.
I love that. And I think that you hit on something that's so important, because we're told as sellers, it's a contact game, right? But the personalization, the humanization becomes even more important now that everything is more virtual. Mm-hmm. And the challenge that we run into is because these tools are so readily available. Like, it's so easy for me to reach out to somebody on LinkedIn or to send an email. These things are easy, which means they're overused, which means that my message can be diluted by those who are doing it wrong or doing it ineffectively.
Right.
And so I think that's why we've really got to double down on, being very intentional about our audience, being very intentional about the message, and then how we try to bring them to the table and then ultimately keep them there.
That's right.
One of the things that you talk about as well is really the difference between selling, the difference between serving, and then also being a self-serving professional. And one thing that I find fascinating about that in general is that often, when we're starting out in sales, right, we're trying to get our bearings, we're trying to get our foundation, we're trying to understand the nuances of selling. And after getting some early success, we may have a certain connotation about sales, but sales over the long term is really becoming a student. It's about understanding, all of the parameters. How do you deliver unique value, and ultimately how you serve?